Hello, and welcome to the Thinkers50 Radar 2023 series, brought to you in partnership with Deloitte. I'm Distill.
And I'm Stuart Craner, and we are the founders of Thinkers50. For more than 20 years, Thinkers50 has been identifying, ranking, and sharing extraordinary business and management ideas. Every January, we announce 30 management and business thinkers to watch in the coming year. These are the new and exciting voices of management.
The result for 2023 is an eclectic group of people who we believe will make an impact with their ideas, their campaigning, their research, and their passion in the coming 12 months. But more than that, by showcasing their ideas, we hope they will be inspired to carry the torch for management thinking in the years ahead. They don't have all the answers, but they are asking important questions.
And talking of questions, we welcome yours at any time during the session. Also, please let us know where you are joining from today and send over your thoughts, questions, queries, insights at any time during the session. Today, we are delighted to be joined by Lindsey McInerney.
Whether building hyper-growth startups or advising Fortune 500 companies, the royal family, or United Nations, Lindsey has spent her career helping people understand the impact of cutting-edge technologies and adopting them early. A self-confessed internet nerd and tech futurist, she's launched multiple projects in the metaverse and Web3 space and remains excited, almost as excited as we are, about the ways that crypto, blockchain, NFTs, and extended reality will change our digital and physical landscape.
As global head of technology and innovation at AB InBev, Anheuser-Busch, the world's largest brewer, she launched Stella Artois into the metaverse, which is something I never thought I would say. I've launched Stella Artois into many directions, but not into the metaverse. And that was an explosive partnership with Zed Run, a crypto horse racing game. I'm sure Lindsey will explain it in its entirety later. Lindsey was founder and CEO of Black Sun Labs. She works with executives, teams, and personalities on their Web3 and metaverse strategies. She's also the CEO of Six Wall, a technology and entertainment company, co-founded with the actor and producer Mila Kunis and producer Lisa Sterbakov. Lindsey, welcome. Did we miss anything out in the review? We must have missed something.
It was a long introduction. No, you missed nothing. Thanks so much for having me, and really happy to join you.
Can you tell us a bit about your journey? How did you get involved? What was the origins of this?
Yeah, look, I think the origins for me were I have always been really fascinated by the internet. Growing up, I didn't find a lot of space in reality that reflected the world that I felt that I wanted to live in, and didn't feel like I was really connecting there. And in the internet, there's so many great communities, and so early on, I started studying the internet, studying the ways it was being used to mobilize people around causes that were important. And then, of course, used it myself to have a lot of fun and find people just like me. Wrote a thesis in hacktivism, and the rest is sort of history. Went on to work on the cutting edge of social media when it was first emerging, helping brands figure out what the heck that was all about, how to understand influence, what to do, how to leverage it. And then sort of kept going from there. Did a number of hyper growth startups, specializing really in emerging markets, but also helping people understand these tech concepts that were new and novel and difficult in some ways, regardless of where they came from, in as simple way as possible. And that led me to AB InBev, where I did a 2-year stint as global head of tech and innovation. And I think that almost brings us up to today.
So what did you do with Stella Artois? Can you decode how I described it?
Yeah, look, Stella Artois was a ton of fun. In 2020, I had written a thesis on metaverse, Web3, crypto, and NFTs for brands. And in that role at AB InBev, I could innovate on almost any technology across the business. So that could have been agricultural technology, bottling technology. The most seismic thing I saw coming was this shift towards a more spatial internet and a different way of folks engaging on the internet. And so that's what I focused on. In early 2021, I wanted to get a little bit more data to sort of validate this thesis. and I partnered with Zed Run, which is a crypto horse racing game, where horses were selling for the price of cars at the time. And that's sort of an important piece because you kind of wonder, how do you get a beer into a digital space? How do you go from Stella Artois to crypto horse racing? And for me, when I'm speaking with brands and folks about how to enter some of this space, my thesis was very much and is very much that people should parallel what they do in reality. And so at AB InBev, if you abstract away the concept of beer, what they really are is a company that brings people together to be entertained. And so inside the portfolio, there are probably two brands that made the most sense to partner with a horse racing game. One was Budweiser. We've got the, AB InBev have the Budweiser have the iconic Clydesdales in reality. They've got stables, that sort of thing. The other one was Stella Artois, and that's because Stella is the sponsor of premium sport. Wimbledon, a very fancy horse race in England, as it turned out, and that sort of thing. And so thinking about where consumers and people would sort of expect us to show up and it would not feel weird, a crypto horse racing game felt like precisely that.
Okay, that's interesting how you make the connections. Let's go back a step or two. You mentioned that you're good at helping people understand tech concepts. The metaverse. I mean, we're becoming more familiar with it now, but it seems to mean slightly different things to slightly different people. What is the metaverse? For you, what does it mean, and how is it going to affect us? Well, let's start with what it means.
Sure. Yeah. Look, we're moving into an era where we have more capacity, technology-wise, to do more interesting things on the internet than just scroll two-dimensional news feeds. And, some people call this a more spatial internet. I would say gaming is the grandparent or godparent of the metaverse. The metaverse for me is really the convergence of the digital and physical. And it's not a world, importantly, where we're stuck in headsets. That is one access point to a potential metaverse. But the metaverse, if that's even what we call it in the end, will be multi-device. It will be, sure, VR headsets in some cases, but more than likely it's going to be access points in our eyewear, contact lenses, and other sort of more ways that are more interesting to augment our world and our reality and the world around us with technology in a way that's actually way healthier than we do today. And what I mean by that is today, if I'm on a hike or if I'm at a football game or something like that, I have to come out of the moment and put my face in a phone to take a picture, to see the next turn, to engage with the technology that might assist me in, something that I'm doing. And in a world where we get a metaverse right, I think we'll have something that is much more seamless in the way it augments the world we live in, but also takes advantage of the ability for the internet to be more interesting and spatial and exploratory than we have today.
And what does getting the metaverse right look like, do you think? What needs to happen for us to get the metaverse right?
Oh God, so this is one of the big questions because we're not at a metaverse today. Some people will call certain things metaverse experiences, or they'll say they're in the metaverse. And for me, again, importantly, there's one metaverse. There's not metaverses. There's one internet. We've got lots of websites, but there's one internet. There'll be one metaverse, again, if that's what we call it, because we used to call the internet like the internet, the information superhighway in the World Wide Web. We just call it the internet now. I don't know what it'll end up being called. But if we get it right, I think we'll be talking about a bunch of interoperable spaces where, again, very much like reality, we can explore them, we can meet each other, we can walk in and out of them, we can take assets from one world to another, we can create, we can co-create, we can add value, and more fully actualize who we are in this space. Because that's how the internet, that's sort of the journey that the internet's gone on. If you think about identity, right? Like early internet was really text-based only, quite bland, but that's the only way you could really show up. So we all chose these crazy pseudonyms because it was too dangerous to use your real name. And we might, use that famous question ASL to understand age, sex, location of folks we were talking to, or sort of give them that information about ourselves. And then Web 2 came along. And of course, in Web 1, if you wanted to create more than that, more than chats, more than text, like you really had to want to because it was hard. Web 2 came along and made content become a lot more rich, where we had pictures, video, we had music. It was much more easy to share. There were consequences to that, but it was a much easier internet to sort of deal with. And you could share more of yourself, was supposed to be the dream. And that ended up being like a bunch of tick boxes that advertisers could select, which never fully represent or actualize somebody. And in this new world, I think, you end up with a space where people can sort of show up as they are or who they want to be, which does some bizarre things when you start thinking about like third person versus first person and how we'll operate ourselves. But I think, it will give us a much richer way to enjoy a digital life or a life online or life in spaces that are on a connected, internet than we have today.
So is this the metaverse? Is this a, I mean, you talk to different people. Some people say it's a huge deal. It's, a very, very significant moment in terms of the internet and the digital world. And other people are a bit more sort of, it's a bit of a fad. How big a milestone is it? And I think what you're saying is we haven't actually arrived yet, but potentially, how big a milestone could it be?
I think we'll have companies that are bigger than Facebook, more immersive than YouTube, and make more money than Amazon. It's inevitable. It's inevitable. Change is the only constant, as we know. The metaverse is inevitable. We're not just going to stop at the internet that we have now. And we've seen tiny shifts in what the internet looks like, even over the past 15 years of Web 2 and the social web, right? Like 15 years ago, maybe 15 years, we didn't have apps on our iPhones. Heck, we didn't have iPhones at all, perhaps. Thinking about the timelines correctly. But, mobile changed things. Apps on the phones changed things. Hardware is going to change things. We're going to see Apple release a new headset, shortly. Things are becoming less expensive. So having augmented experiences in your eyewear is going to be much more common. It's a slow pace at the moment, but it's going to be massive, seismic, larger than sort of, anything I've felt. I think as well because of the economic opportunities that are going to be built in a little bit differently with the blockchain. Not sure when we'll get there exactly, but we're certainly creeping our way forward.
Thank you to everyone who's joined us. I've got people from Italy, Denmark, the States, India, the UK, and I was pleased to see somebody from Georgia. Thank you for joining us. Please send in your questions for Lindsey at any point. I mean, looking at your career, Lindsey, what's really interesting, how do you find the cutting edge repeatedly?
It's a great question. I couldn't tell you exactly, how I do that well over and over, but I think that a lot of what I do is explore humans and how humans are changing and what they're enjoying and what they're not and what's working and what's not. I think that sort of informs a lot of what I believe people become ready for technology wise. One of my theses about why the metaverse is sort of, 3 points. Obviously, the pandemic poured gasoline on everything digital. The second point is this convergence of all these technologies that are just sort of ripe for prime time and still have development to do, but like really kind of getting there. And the third one is that, people are just ready for a new way to do things. There's political unrest. We have a great divide between the rich and the poor. We are wildly divided politically. There's no middle anymore. It's, you're left, you're right. There's this opinion or that opinion. We don't dialogue. And, people have felt frustrated about the way that the internet has exploited their data. They're frustrated in their governments. And so that leaves things really ripe for new ways of doing things, new technologies to sort of fit themselves in and slot themselves into life. And people are really open to adopting them. So I think, for me, being on top of technology is actually more about being on top of the social issues and on top of humans. And I think that's something I do well consistently.
When I've spoken to you before, Lindsey, you talked about, this being an opportunity to, if I understood you correctly, to sort of reclaim the digital world. Some of the things that went wrong in the last couple of iterations. I mean, we ended up with the whole space seemingly dominated by a few very large corporations, for example. Obviously, there's a lot of concern at the moment about AI and all that stuff. I mean, is the metaverse our chance to perhaps balance things out a little bit, make it a bit more ethical?
Yeah, I think that's partly the goal. I really do think that the Web3 space, metaverse space, whatever you want to call it today, is sort of combining some of the best of Web 1 and Web 2. And some of the best of Web 1 was that we agreed on standardized protocols that allowed development to happen really quickly and globally. And, you could build things and know that the protocol was going to stay the same. So safely you could choose to make a business on top of it. Web 2, we went for a much more centralized internet, and there were benefits. There are benefits to that. A much more centralized internet allowed things to move really quickly. We can build Facebook pages way faster than we could ever build a website. You can share things much more seamlessly, but there were consequences of that, right? The classics say, if it's free, you're the product, and that's never been more true. We kind of lost a lot of control and say there. And so I think, Web3, the metaverse, if we get it right, and there's two different streams pushing here, and likely we'll end up with a blend of the two. But if we get it right, we stand a chance to take things back to a much more decentralized internet where people own their data, where we're talking about, sovereignty of data, who owns what, it's you, and you choose, who and when you unlock that information. There's reward and incentivization in co-creating and creating spaces. You're not just posting gorgeous pictures on a picture sharing platform for the owner of that platform to sell advertisements against it. You're sharing pictures, and if it's consumed a lot, you might be gaining some sort of social currency, in that situation. So I think about what if, in what world, how cool would it be if we were rewarded and had earned a token for all of the times we received a like, share, comment on Facebook, or all the minutes we'd spent on Facebook. These sorts of things. And these models are being played with. I don't profess to have all the answers for sure, but I think there's certainly an opportunity here to re-examine what we've done and where that's come from, and think about how we want to do things moving forward.
Ganesh from Chennai in India asked about the implications for the education system. I presume there's huge possibilities around the metaverse and other technologies around education. What do you envisage happening, and how genuine are the opportunities?
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot of really interesting conversations happening right now about education and the future, what that looks like with both AI as well as potentially a metaverse. One of the first things that captivated me in 2016 was VR. In this space of this sort of bracket column of technologies, VR, where I put a headset on for the first time, and I'm a scuba diver, and I entered some sort of underwater experience, and I was blown away, because while it wasn't scuba diving, it certainly wasn't sitting in my living room watching it on TV either. And I thought about immediately all the ways that you could take people to places that they could never go otherwise, or they don't want to go otherwise. The opportunities to educate people on what it's like to be Canadian or British or Indian, or all of these other, magnificent things, give people more social context and more context on what a lived experience looks like elsewhere. To be able to learn inside the Colosseum in Rome, to be able to learn inside ancient Greece with ancient Greek philosophers, all of these things I think are really interesting. And I'm also very conscious that depending on how we choose to develop them, they will only be accessible to a certain number of people. And the internet is not a technology that's available to everybody today. And that's a fault. And so I think this is where I think a lot about the future having to be multi-device. There are those extraordinary sort of ambitious opportunities to do things, for example, in VR. But if we can't design them for mobile on a 3G internet, then, we're probably not thinking hard enough. But the internet's main superpower is connecting people to thoughts, to ideas, to educators in locations that they would never get to travel to otherwise. And I think the future is very, very friendly in that way.
Staying with education and ancient philosophers, we were having a conversation a little bit before we started the webinar about what the sort of skill set and how we should be preparing, younger people in particular, preparing for this brave new world. And perhaps you could paint the picture that you were sort of describing.
Yeah, look, I think that I think the world's going to be very, very different. The world is different for me than it was for my parents. Kids now are going to need completely different skills. All the kids who grew up being yelled at, that's my generation and my brother's generation, for being on their video game consoles, Like that's totally a space that kids should be spending more time, because now you're going to need to learn to think in 3D and understand how what that means. And that is a totally different language and skill set. Everybody is going to be sort of a creator, in my opinion. And so we need to be thinking about how do we influence and light that up. And those are some of the big ones that I'm thinking about. And I'm really hopeful that it's all the weirdos that get to be front and center in this next evolution and revolution of internet.
You're advocating the humanities as well. People should study, perhaps go in for that. We should be trying to enhance the human elements rather than others.
Oh, certainly. I am writing a TED Talk and giving a TED Talk on that exact topic, which is the rebirth of the humanities in the age of artificial intelligence. So I've got more on that coming for you, Des. But yeah, like I'm a huge advocate for the humanities. I am an English grad, and going back to sort of even some of what I said earlier about what makes me good at technology is actually the ability to be human and my ability to understand different things inside of individuals. And so, I think that is a tremendous thing that we got to keep focused on. And I'll always be a big fan of the humanities.
Abby Lutz comments, just be an octopus, school is for fish, which he said before you mentioned you like scuba diving, Lindsey. So she's obviously far-sighted. Dean Miles has got a question. He's curious about your perspective on trust in AR realities. Obviously, trust is a huge element in this. What
just reading the question. Yeah, look, okay, so I think what you're getting at here is, like who is making this AR and AR experiences? What are they? What's the sort of exchange in value that we are having as individuals who use these experiences? And so, if you need to exchange your retina and that goes into a database with all your other information, and that is a scary experience. And I think we have an opportunity and a responsibility as we start to unload more sophisticated technology that has the ability to capture more human data and information. We have a responsibility to really think about whether that's the right thing to do, what we need, and if we want to end up with like a version 2 of what we ended up with in Web 2 and in the social internet, where we saw data on Facebook, for example, weaponized for the purposes of genocide and Brexit and Trump and lots of other things, right? So, I think that's what you're getting at there, Dean. And I'm a skeptic as well. I think these experiences are fantastic, but it's always a question of what's the currency? What are we trading off? And could we afford to have a different model in place where what we're trading off is less consequential to us as people?
Do you realistically see that an opportunity to dislodge? You mentioned Facebook. We all have our ideas about Facebook, but the titans, as it were, the big companies. Are they going to be? Are they going to be really going to be disrupted? They seem to be sort of absorbing the next wave. The AI. They seem to be able to ride the currents at the moment,
but they're struggling. Right? Like something I know about working inside a big company, and what happens in every big company is that it's really hard to innovate truly. You can spin out little departments, you can spin out labs, but it's really hard to move a big ship. And it's hard not to sort of rest as well, even if you see the waves coming on the things that have made you highly successful. And in every era of technology, we've got examples of big tech companies that were the titans and aren't anymore. I see the Googles, the Facebooks, Meta, and these other companies taking swings and sort of trying to plant, seeds. We'll see how that plays out. I think they have no choice; they have to. But does that mean that there's not room for somebody to come in and completely disrupt it? No. Like I would be shocked if we didn't have totally different top 3 tech companies in the next 10, 15 years than we have today.
We had an event in London probably 5-6 years ago, and there were 300 people in the room, and the speaker said, "Who in the room trusts Facebook?" And I think two people put their hand up, and I think they were just a bit confused. But it's difficult to think organize.
They have their work cut out for them to earn back trust from people, and especially, to the point we were talking about earlier, as we start to immerse ourselves in more, in-depth experiences, whether it's through AR or VR, that's going to be a question on people's minds. No doubt about it.
Interesting. Obviously, you kind of what you were describing is Clay Christensen's, innovator's dilemma. The fact that and when you're in the moment, it's very hard to see the giants falling. I mean, you've just kind of reminded me of the fact that there was a time when certain companies that are no longer with us, of course, just seemed unstoppable. And of course, how the mighty do fall. So we should expect to see that, and probably at an accelerating pace. Another question we've got coming in from Stephen is, what do you see as the biggest challenges for businesses interested in leveraging new technologies?
It's a great question. I think, there's lots of challenges, and I think they're different depending on who you are. But in every era where we see a brand's or a company's ability to sort of control their audience change, we just see people struggle a lot with figuring out how to do that. And I think the best example of that is when we moved from PR press releases, to a social web where you had to design a different tweet for Twitter than you did a post for LinkedIn, and you did a post for Facebook. People stumbled. There were crazy gaffes in that era. There was a lot of people who were very late adopting, perhaps regrettably so. And really what you had to do was hire in some really young new people who understood how to think about the ethos and value of that space a lot differently. And this era is no different. The ethos and value have completely changed. It is not broadcast. It is not telling us what to do. It is, co-creating with people on the internet. It is driving value and benefit to the fans and people who engage with your brand. It's a lot more humble. And I think that's going to be really difficult for a lot of people who are used to sort of architecting the way that they want to appear and look and feel. I think it's going to be really difficult for folks to let go.
Hiring young people is usually the answer.
Totally. Young people know way more than we do. We should hire all of them. 20-year-olds are the smartest people in the room. And we have a heck of a lot to learn from them. And we underestimate that like crazy. I can't tell you how many rooms I still walk into where people want to speak to the oldest person or the most experienced. They've got wisdom, there's no question, but the young people know what's up and they know where things are going. And we would do really well to lean in more to what they're thinking.
Yeah, but do you think 60-odd-year-old CEOs, do they really have any clue of this?
Yeah, they do. If you're a CEO and you're 60 years old, you've seen enough trends to recognize when it's coming. The question will be, do you have the humility to do what you need to do to be really freaking good at that thing? And that might be to recognize, that here's what I know, and here's what this young person knows, here's what this crypto native knows, here's what this gamer knows, here's this, and how do I assemble a squad that helps me to accelerate my business? And that's what makes the best leaders anyway.
But yeah, you tend not to get promoted for your humility, though.
I think you get promoted for the work of your team. So if you're able to design a team that completely kills it and knocks it out of the park in a new space, sets the pace for others, I think that you get promoted on those things. It's a really old idea to think that you have to be the smartest person in the room, or you have to have delivered the best idea in isolation to do well. So surround yourself with young, smart things.
Yeah. A question from Elizabeth in Copenhagen. I find myself becoming less and less happy the more time I spend online. What do you see the implications being for mental and maybe even physical health? In my fears for the future, things look Black Mirror-y.
Yeah, Elizabeth, I'm with you. And technology is not going away. This is where my hope is that we can learn to have a better relationship with it. So, again, rather than having to absorb ourselves in screens all the time, we reach a world where the benefits we gain from technology are more seamlessly integrated in the way we operate in the world. And that's my hope. We also need to be thinking as we develop things, how addictive do we want them to be? That's a question we didn't ask hard enough in this last era. And an immersive web stands to be far more addictive. No question. So these are the right questions to ask. Like I said, I don't have all the answers, but these are the right questions to ask. And they're the ones we need to be, working on when you're developing these experiences, when your company wants to launch these experiences, when you're working inside the startup that becomes the next Facebook. What kind of metrics do you want to drive to, and how do you want people to interface and interact with your product? And most importantly, what kind of world do we want to live in? Because regardless of what metaverse we end up with or anything else, the most important world we have is the one we live on and the one we live in. And, there's only one planet Earth. And this, it sounds crazy, but, it truly is the most important. And it's not lost on me that the metaverse and the idea of the metaverse always comes from dystopian fiction, where the world is in such utter disarray. The only thing we have left to do is spend time immersed and tapped into a three-dimensional space elsewhere. And we need to do our job to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Yeah, that kind of, Alexandra's got a question which is sort of relates to that. She says, I enjoy my real life and nature. And so I'm not super keen on implementing technology in a larger extent, but will people and I absolutely sympathize with that. Will people like Alexandra and myself end up sort of shut out? And Stuart, he'll be on the outside, I'm sure. Will we end up locked out of sort of communities and society and not really knowing what's going on?
It's a great question. And look, we're always going to need people who are much more immersed in the real world. I think something that has occurred to me a lot these past years is that there's like way more in life than just big city tech jobs, right? Like there's lots of countryside, there's lots of mountains, there's lots of oceans, and there's lots of really important roles to play in reality and in those communities that, everything is going to leverage technology in some way or another, but there's certainly roles that don't involve being on a computer every day. Alexandra, like maybe that one's for you. I don't think you'll fall completely behind. I don't think all of our socializing is going digital anytime soon. And there's a lot of value in reality.
I was heartened when you said that the metaverse doesn't necessarily mean that we have to wear headsets all the time. Can you give us you mentioned earlier that you enjoy hiking, which is obviously close to Alexandra's heart as well. Can you kind of paint a picture of how the metaverse might sort of enhance that experience? What I'm getting is that you're not, it's not that you're got a headset on and you're kind of walking in a false thing. You're still out in nature, but perhaps through your glasses or through something, you're getting a different.
Yeah. Like I think about like really simple things like, going on a hike in East Sussex and having something come up that my eyewear knows I would find interesting, like the fact that I'm stumbling on Roman ruins. And I would never have known that otherwise. And I'm so grateful to have been given a blurb, out of nowhere that like, hey, this was what happened here. This is what this battle was. This is who was buried here. This was the importance of this site, and I carry on. And likewise, today, turn by turn, I'm like pulling my phone out and then I see my notifications there for email or text or whatever else. And of course, rather than just check the turn on my phone, I dive into my text messages. And I see a world where if I've decided that the thing I want to do is hike for 2 hours with my partner and my dog, that I don't come out of the moment. It's again, just a left or a right here, in highlighting the most important turns, the most important information, and the things that computationally it understands I would find important or interesting. Likewise, I could see my eyewear taking photographs for me. Instead of having to pull out a phone and again, check the text messages. Of course, I'm going to do that. I see, a world like this where things are just a lot more seamless and helpful versus distracting. That's the hope. That's the hope.
No.
Who gets this? Are the huge differences between different countries? For instance, Japan and China are very positive about technology. They see it as a really positive force, whereas often in the West and Europe, there's more questioning of the merits of the technology. Do you detect those differences?
Yeah, I think that always, you're right. Different countries adopt things differently based on lived experience and the way life looks, there. I always find, perhaps it's because Silicon Valley's there, perhaps it's because everybody's so spread out. America, seems pretty open to to technology. You're right. You see, China, big gaming market, Japan, big gaming market, South Korea. So perhaps more open to some of these things. But, I think the key would be really tapping into the different use cases that make sense to people in their home country or home region. And to be determined what that looks like. But perhaps for folks in Italy, it's not jumping into a video game or, certain spaces that are totally fit for purpose in Japan. And so you think, again, thinking that the metaverse will likely parallel reality, we will likely end up with multiple worlds, multiple universes, multiple countries that replicate and have interesting experiences for the people that live in those places.
If it's telling you about Roman ruins in Italy, you'd be...
I would be spending a long time on my eyewear if it was telling me about Roman ruins in Italy.
So what's the role of government in all?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
Doing enough? Do they really understand it? I mean, I see that the British government, for instance, is championing maths and science at a time when you're saying perhaps we should reconsider our relationship with educating in the humanities.
Totally. No, the government doesn't get this stuff. We've seen so many times great examples of politicians who might be very good at that job, maybe not, certainly not understand technology. They don't understand the internet that we have today. Can't expect them to understand the internet of the future. I don't think that they're consulting yet enough experts. I think they're starting to pay attention. I think in particular to AI, we're seeing some very big conversations, but making the right choices, having the right diet of information on these sorts of things and really understanding the nuance of some of these problems. I'm not convinced yet. I think technologists are always worried about regulation because they think that that's going to slow things down and slow development down. And I sort of feel like there's probably a balance to be had where on certain things that are coming, we undoubtedly need some sort of regulation, some sort of way to democratically decide what happens with these technologies, who they're developed for, who they're developed by, who owns them, the data that's going to be harvested from them, the impact, how quickly we roll them out, who has access, lots of big, huge questions. I'd love to see a world where we're looking at that more closely inside of government, but I don't think that, I think there's a balance between regulation and slowing things down and moving quickly and still doing very cool things. So I think we can keep the train moving while we ask important questions. And I think that's the balance that government largely hasn't got right or hasn't made technologists feel they've got right, if that makes sense, historically.
What do you make of, that there's obviously Elon Musk, not least, suggesting, I mean, we're moving slightly into, kind of the AI space, but, that perhaps everything should stop until we figured out what the ethical framework is going to be. How do you, are you in agreement, or do you think it's perhaps there's a bit of cynicism in that?
I think that what that statement did was probably help people, even in government, to understand how quickly this was coming down the pipe, how absolutely seismic and important it's going to be. AI is going to be bigger than the internet, and that technology changed our lives forever in massive ways we'll never really understand. So I think it was an important statement to make. Do I believe that we should stop building and wait for regulation? I think that's the exact problem that technology folk get frustrated with. And I think that there's a balance. Again, just because we're building and doing things in a closed, contained space doesn't mean that it's public and everyone has access to it and that it's live and unleashed on the world. And we do that in science all the time, where we do things in a laboratory that we wouldn't do in reality, or we would like to do perhaps in reality, but not quite yet. We're not ready for it. And I think there's probably, some sort of balance like that, and certainly some agreements that we're going to need to want to make, because AI stands to do a lot of great things, and it stands to do a lot of great harm, like any tool as well.
How do you describe what you do, Lindsey? When you meet somebody and say, what do you do, Lindsey?
I usually punt it. I tell people that I work in tech. I tell people, I'm a technologist and futurist by trade. My favorite thing, and the thing I think I'm the best at, is helping people understand how things are moving in a really simple way. In technology in particular, people love to use big words to make themselves feel clever and at the exclusion of others. And my favorite thing to do is dumb it down and make it super simple so that we can bring more people together to have conversations that are meaningful, and more people can feel like there's, space for them. So I think that that's, what I do well. That's mostly how I talk about what I do. And I always hope it makes sense, but I'm never quite sure if it does.
And do you think the quality of conversations is improving around technology?
Yeah, I do. I think, in lots of ways, we don't have a choice. Like everybody engages with technology in some sort of way now. Most people do. And so most people have an opinion. My favorite conversations right now are with parents, actually, where, being a parent's the hardest job in the world. Figuring out how to moderate and manage technology around kids in a way that advantages them, given that it's a world they're going to live in, but also allows them to go out and play football after school instead and give them a healthy balance. Like hardest conversations. And I'm really enjoying speaking with parents who are trying to figure out how to manage tech.
No, that's interesting. When are you going to write a book?
That is a great question, Des. I have to find time to slow down. I have some things I'd love to say right now, so I'll keep you posted on that.
Okay. All right. Tell us a little bit about Sixth Wall, though, because that intrigues me as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So Sixth Wall is focusing on the intersection between technology and entertainment. Really, considering that this last era of technology birthed streaming services and lots of other things that really changed that landscape in that world. And this era is going to be no different. So we're really looking to figure out what kinds of things that is. Looking to push traditional cinematic experiences outside that traditional cinematic screen. So how can we bring people into writers' rooms? How can we get people more closely aligned to what's happening in the creation process? Are there experiences that can be created that extend the IP and the franchise of something to something a bit more tangible, both in digital worlds and physical worlds. So, looking at stuff like that.
No, that sounds fascinating. I mean, wouldn't it be great to sort of have an insight into what goes on when they're writing the script to your favorite, to actually be able to step into that space and see more of that. Yeah, as you say, creative process is always endlessly fascinating, I think.
Yeah.
So where can people find out more about your work, Lindsey?
That's a great question. I tend to share a little bit on LinkedIn, Twitter. I am at the McInerney, which is a heck of a last name. I apologize, on Twitter. We'd be happy to connect on LinkedIn and share more updates there.
And Alexandra asks, can you share resources that dumb it down? Well,
yeah.
Who do you think is really good at dumbing down the technology to make sense of it for mere mortals?
That's a great question. I've got a couple of talks that I think I've shared, historically on LinkedIn, and I think I need to write more is the answer here, Alexandra. I need to write more.
I think yes. I think we're all agreed on that. It's a question of you finding the time to do it. But we look forward to when you do find the time, and please come back and tell us about it and keep in touch. But
thank you.
We are out of time, I'm afraid. So a huge thank you to Lindsey. That was absolutely fascinating, and I feel so much more knowledgeable about the metaverse now.
And I'm beginning to feel like my grandma, like Alexandra's turning into my grandma. Really great conversation, Lindsey. Thank you very much. We'll be back in June with Thinkers50 at Hult, which is a weekly webinar throughout June. So thank you everyone from throughout the world for joining us, and thank you very much, Lindsey.